I can't believe I'm standing in the middle of a battle without knowing how to fix it. My daughter, whom I've poured my heart into protecting, now refuses to even look at her brother after a serious mistake. As a mother, I feel powerless watching my two children turn their backs on each other. Every attempt at reconciliation has failed. Is there any way to mend this relationship before it's too late? Surely, no one could imagine what will happen next. I clearly remember the day my daughter Emma, 10 years old, first told me about the horrific events that had occurred. At the time, I thought we could get through it, that time and therapy would help my daughter heal. But I never imagined the depth of the wound or how it would impact her for the rest of her life. Since the incident, Emma became a different child. She was no longer the cheerful, talkative girl she had been. Emma was always an intelligent and creative child, but after the trauma, she became increasingly withdrawn and quiet. She no longer engaged in the activities she once loved, like painting or playing the piano. Instead, Emma spent most of her time alone, reading or listening to music. Even so, I understood and respected her silence, knowing she needed time to heal, and I would do anything to protect her from anything that could hurt her further. Emma never wanted to talk about what had happened, and I never pushed her. All I did was stay by her side, listen when she needed, and protect what she considered private. I remember those evenings when the whole family would sit at the dinner table, and Emma would quietly eat, not participating in our conversations. James, my son, would sometimes try to engage with her, but Emma would only respond with brief nods or complete silence. I could see the loneliness in her eyes, but I also understood that this was her way of trying to protect herself from painful memories. For us, it was a long, painful process, but it was necessary. She never spoke about it, but I could feel the struggles she had endured over the years. Almost no one outside the family and Emma's close friends knew the truth about what she had been through. We always tried to keep it a secret to protect her. Only a few of Emma's closest friends, the ones she trusted, knew the story behind the strong facade she presented. I remember one day when Emma and I were sitting on the couch in the living room. She looked at me with eyes full of uncertainty. "Mom, if anyone knew about this, how would they look at me?" Her question made me choke up. Emma didn't want anyone to know because she feared they would see her differently. I could only hug her and say that no one had the right to do that. No one had the right to judge her for what she had gone through. I reminded her that the most important thing was that she was still herself, no matter how awful things had been. But deep down, I was also scared. Scared that one day everything would be exposed and there would be no way to shield her from the world's judgment. But Emma's story wouldn't remain a secret forever. One day, as Emma entered her teen years, I noticed she began to change, gradually opening up more. I felt hopeful that she might start confronting her past in a stronger way. However, that change didn't last long. An unexpected event soon occurred, completely altering everything in our family. That was when I discovered that my son, James, knew about what had happened. We hadn't spoken much about it with him, as I didn't want to pressure him or make him suffer because of what his sister had gone through. However, I never imagined that one day this story would come out of the shadows. James, with his playful nature and lack of thought, had accidentally revealed the secret to his friends. At first, I didn't think it would have serious consequences. I assumed that a few of James's friends would hear it and then forget about it. But I was wrong. One careless remark from James caused everything to unravel. The story that Emma had worked so hard to keep private suddenly became a topic of gossip at school. It wasn't long before I started receiving messages from Emma's friends asking if I knew what was happening. At that moment, I felt like the whole world was collapsing, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Since I found out that Emma's story was exposed, everything in our house changed. The first feeling I had was panic, not just because Emma's story was out, but because I didn't know what to do to protect her. Things began to escalate when this information spread not only through her school, but also throughout the neighborhood. Emma had worked so hard to keep it a secret, and now everyone knew. She was deeply hurt, and the pain was not just the invasion of her privacy, but the fact that she had to face the curious and judgmental eyes of others. When I looked at Emma, she didn't say anything. She just stood there, her eyes tired and disappointed. The tears no longer fell, but in her silence I could feel the deep wound inside her. "Why did he do that, Mom?" Emma asked me in a voice so faint it was as if she no longer had the strength to speak. I didn't know how to answer. I couldn't explain to her that it was a mistake, that James didn't mean any harm, but the pain she was feeling was so deep. James, on the other hand, was completely different. The boy who was always close to me and everyone, who wanted to make amends with anyone, was now utterly disappointed in himself. I would find James sitting alone in his room, tears streaming down his face, blaming himself for hurting the person he loved most. He had apologized countless times, explaining it was a mistake, a moment of thoughtlessness. But every time Emma looked at him and turned away, not a word in response, not a single glance. At this point, I was not only concerned about Emma, but also about James. He was suffering from loneliness and an overwhelming sense of guilt. I knew he hadn't meant to hurt anyone, but his thoughtless actions had caused a deep rift in our family. Every time I saw him with his head in his hands, quietly crying, my heart ached. As a mother, I felt torn at a crossroads. Could I fix this relationship between my children? I tried to talk to Emma, hoping to understand her feelings and find a way to help her heal from the pain. But Emma just shook her head, her eyes empty. "Mom, I don't want to see him anymore," my daughter said in a cold tone. Every time I tried to offer advice, Emma just remained silent, offering no response. It seemed as though she had decided that James was no longer someone she wanted in her life. I understood Emma's feelings, but I also knew this wasn't the way to resolve things. Although I couldn't force my daughter to forgive or reconcile, it broke my heart to see the relationship between my children fall apart. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier with each passing day. Dinner time was no longer a family gathering. Emma wouldn't speak, wouldn't look at James, while he kept trying to talk to her, only to be met with cold silence. James kept apologizing, but it seemed like nothing he did would make a difference. I couldn't do anything to change Emma's decision. The feeling of helplessness only grew stronger, and I began to worry. Would my daughter ever forgive her brother? And would our family ever stop living in this state, with an unbridgeable gap between my children? All of these questions circled in my mind, but there were no clear answers. As time passed, nothing in our family seemed to improve. Although I knew I couldn't force Emma to forgive James, I couldn't stop worrying about the price he was paying for his thoughtlessness. I saw the tension and suffering in both of my children, and my heart was torn. As a mother, I didn't know which side to stand on, because both were suffering in their own ways, and I felt powerless to heal their wounds. I tried to talk to Emma, but every time I opened my mouth, she turned away, refusing to face me. There were nights when the whole family would sit down for dinner, and the atmosphere was so heavy that I just wanted to stop everything to fix things. Emma remained silent, sometimes just glancing at me before continuing to eat without saying a word. James, on the other hand, would always try to strike up a conversation, but every effort was in vain. He would look at Emma with hope in his eyes, only to be met with cold silence. I began to feel like I was caught between two worlds. Emma needed me to stand by her, but I couldn't look at James as if he didn't deserve forgiveness. He had hurt his sister, but it wasn't out of malice. He was just a thoughtless kid. Yet when I saw Emma so alone and in pain, my heart broke. With each passing day, I felt like I was failing both of them, not knowing how to fix it. The feeling of helplessness grew deeper when I realized that my family was on the brink of falling apart. Emma no longer wanted to come home after school. She spent more time out with her friends, trying to stay away from everything in the house. James was the same, retreating into his room, no longer participating in the conversations he once did. He just stayed in his room, playing games or doing his own thing, no longer expecting Emma to forgive him. I tried to help, but the situation didn't change. In fact, it only worsened as I started to feel that my efforts might actually be making things worse. I didn't know if I was inadvertently damaging the relationship between my children by trying too hard. All I wanted was to see them come together again. But I also knew I couldn't force Emma's feelings. She wasn't ready to forgive, and that was completely understandable. I had tried to get the whole family into therapy, but Emma refused. She didn't want to talk to anyone, not even the therapist. Every time she would just put on her headphones and tune everyone out. The sense of desperation overwhelmed me. Was there any way to mend this relationship, or would my family remain in this state? Things were getting worse, and I felt like I was standing on the outside, unable to help my children. So I didn't know what to do next. The entire family was in a state of tension, and everything seemed to have no way out. The exhaustion grew in me each day, and I wasn't sure if I could hold this family together anymore. All I knew was that I wouldn't give up, but I also didn't know what I could do to fix it all. Everything seemed to be at a dead end. After months of struggling with feelings of helplessness, I decided once again to try bringing the whole family into therapy. I believed that if we could sit down together with the guidance of a professional, maybe something would change. But this time Emma refused even more adamantly. She not only refused therapy but began to withdraw completely, almost isolating herself from the family entirely. I knew she was trying to protect herself, but that distance only made me feel lonelier and more defeated than ever. One day, while I was sitting alone in the living room, I received a message from James. He said he had bought a gift for Emma and asked if I could help him give it to her. I could sense the anxiety and regret in every word he typed. James was no longer the cheerful, carefree boy he had been before. He had become quiet and contemplative, no longer with the bright energy he once had. This time it wasn't just any gift. It was something meaningful, a necklace he had saved up for over the course of several months. I found myself at a crossroads. Should I give Emma the gift? Could it help her reconsider everything? Or would it just be another mistake, making things worse? But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep my children in this state forever. The situation had become too tense, and I couldn't just stand by and watch it continue. When I gave the gift to Emma, she didn't say a word. She just silently took it. Her gaze was cold, as if the gift didn't mean anything to her. "Thank you, Mom," Emma said briefly, then turned away. I wasn't sure if she really understood James's heartfelt gesture, but what I saw in her eyes only made me feel more heartbroken. She didn't want to forgive. She didn't want to come back. With each passing day, Emma grew more closed off, as if everything related to the family, everything related to the past, had been locked in a box that no one could open. James didn't say anything more about the gift. He simply returned to his own activities, like a son who quietly bore his own pain in silence. But I knew he couldn't accept the coldness and silence. He couldn't understand why Emma couldn't forgive him, and I couldn't explain to him that sometimes forgiveness takes time and it was something Emma had to decide on her own. For me, what I felt now was loneliness, not only from Emma but from James too. I felt like I was stuck between my two children, both living in separate worlds that I couldn't enter. I wanted to help them. I wanted to see them reconcile, but I also knew that I couldn't force anything. And right now, all I could do was stand by, watching my children suffer, hoping that one day they would find their way back to each other. But would that day ever come? We've come a long way since everything started, but right now, I still feel like I'm standing on the edge of a bottomless pit with no way out. After I gave Emma the gift from James, nothing seemed to change. Emma continued to keep her distance and showed no sign of opening up. Every day in the house was filled with silence, heavy and suffocating. The tension between Emma and James remained as intense as ever, and I didn't know what to do to heal the wounds they were both carrying. I remember one time I overheard a conversation between James and his friend. He was saying that no matter how much he wanted to fix things, he felt like he was losing his sister forever. My heart broke when I heard that. James wasn't a kid who intentionally hurt anyone. He had just acted thoughtlessly, and now he was paying a heavy price. No matter how sorry he was, it couldn't ease the pain Emma was feeling. A week later, I received an invitation from Emma's school about attending her graduation ceremony. When I asked if the family could come, Emma responded with a short and cold answer. "If you want to, you can come." That was all she said to me. Her response was distant and emotionless. I didn't know if she truly wanted me there on such an important day, but it saddened me to think that on her graduation day, my daughter wouldn't even want me by her side. James wasn't invited. He knew that and accepted it. Although I knew it would hurt my son, I couldn't change Emma's decision. He had to live with the consequences of his own mistake, and I didn't know what to do to fix the rift between them. I couldn't force Emma to change her feelings, but I couldn't ignore James's pain either. The day of the graduation arrived, and I felt an unusual tension in my chest. I decided to go, even knowing that my presence might not be welcome. At least I hoped I could see Emma smile on such an important day, even if only for a moment. But I also knew that nothing would change between the two children unless they found their own way to face each other. When I arrived at the graduation ceremony, it felt like I was standing on the outside of Emma's life. She stood on stage, receiving her diploma, but her eyes didn't look toward her family. I knew she was experiencing powerful emotions, but they weren't the joy I had hoped for. I saw my daughter standing there, not looking toward me or James, as if we were no longer part of her life. When the ceremony ended, I didn't know what to do next. Emma didn't say a word. Didn't look at me once. I went home, feeling empty. Even though I tried not to let the sadness take over, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. The sense of separation between my two children hadn't changed, and I didn't know what to do next. The situation remained the same, and I didn't know if I could do anything to fix it.